Fyodor Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground is one of the most haunting philosophical novels ever written, a psychological exploration into the darkest corners of the human soul. At the center of this story is an unnamed narrator, an embittered, hyper-intellectual man who has completely withdrawn from society. He doesn't just avoid people, he resents them. He watches the world from the shadows, mocking it, analyzing it, but never engaging with it. And yet, underneath all that cynicism, he is painfully aware of one thing: he is miserable. Why? Because deep down, he craves love and connection, but his pride won't allow it. Dostoevsky introduces the concept of dreaming, a psychological escape, where the underground man retreats into a fantasy world where he is the ultimate hero. In his mind, he is powerful, admired, worshipped. He dreams of saving the world, of people bowing before him, of finally getting the recognition he believes he deserves. But here's the problem. This dream is a lie. It's a shield, a defense mechanism. Instead of facing the real world, with all its struggles, disappointments, and vulnerabilities, he hides in his fantasies, where he is always in control. But fantasies aren't enough. Eventually, the underground man steps into reality. He meets a woman, a prostitute, who is drowning in sorrow. For the first time, he has a chance to form a genuine human connection. But instead of opening up, instead of embracing vulnerability, he plays the hero. He delivers a grand intellectual speech, casting himself as her savior. And for a moment, it works. She believes in him. She sees him as her beacon of hope. But then something happens. He realizes that for her to truly love him, she would have to see him as he really is, not as a powerful, dominant figure, but as a flawed, broken man. And that terrifies him. The fantasy crumbles. He is not a hero. He is not strong. He is just a lonely, spiteful man living in a tiny, filthy room. And so, instead of embracing her love, he pushes her away. He insults her. He humiliates her. He destroys the very connection he once longed for, because to accept her love would mean surrendering his pride. And that he cannot do. This is where Dostoevsky leaves us with a painful question. How can we live when our deepest desires, our need for love, connection, and meaning, are constantly at war with our pride, our ego, and our fear of vulnerability? The underground man chooses isolation. He chooses bitterness. He chooses to retreat back into his fantasies rather than face the terrifying truth of human connection. And for this, he suffers. But is there another way? Is there an escape from this self-made prison? Dostoevsky provides an answer, not in Notes from Underground, but in another masterpiece, The Brothers Karamazov. And this brings us to the second half of our discussion. Father Zosima, the man who found redemption by doing the exact opposite of the underground man. He was reckless, arrogant, and selfish, much like the underground man. He was a military officer who indulged in excess, driven by pride and the thirst for status. Then something happened that shattered his world. He fell in love. But the woman he loved was secretly engaged to another man. When he discovered this betrayal, his ego was crushed. He felt humiliated, weak, stripped of the image of himself that he had carefully built. And so, like many men ruled by pride, he sought revenge. He challenged the woman's fiancé to a duel, believing that by defeating his rival he could reclaim his lost pride, restore his dignity, and prove that he was still the hero of his own story. But then, something changed. The night before the duel, he was consumed with rage. In his frustration, he took out his anger on one of his servants, a helpless man beneath him. He beat him mercilessly, as if punishing someone weaker would somehow make him feel stronger. And here's where Zosima's story diverges from the underground man's. The underground man, in similar moments, would rationalize his cruelty, convincing himself that he was justified, that he was somehow above it all. But Zosima, he felt guilt, not just momentary regret, but deep, life-changing remorse. Instead of wallowing in self-pity or retreating into fantasies of dominance, he did the unthinkable. He humbled himself. The very next morning, he went to the servant he had beaten, knelt before him and begged for forgiveness. In that moment, he realized something that the underground man never could. True strength is not in pride, but in humility. Then came the duel. His rival fired first, but missed. Now it was Zosima's turn. This was his moment, his chance to reclaim his honor, to prove his dominance, to restore his self-image. But instead of pulling the trigger, he lowered his gun. He refused to kill. He rejected revenge. He walked away from the illusion that power and pride would bring him happiness. And in doing so, he found something far greater than victory. He found peace. Dostoevsky isn't just telling us a story. He's showing us a reflection of Christ himself. Think about it. Christ had every right to reign as a king, as a conqueror. But he didn't. Instead, he humbled himself, taking on the role of a servant. He didn't seek power. He gave it up. And in the ultimate act of humility, he surrendered to the cross. Instead of destroying his enemies, he forgave them. Instead of proving his strength through force, he proved it through sacrifice. Zosima follows this same path. He gives up his power. He kneels in humility. He chooses love over pride, service over dominance, and mercy over vengeance. And in doing so, he is set free. And this is where Dostoevsky gives us the ultimate contrast. The underground man is trapped in isolation because he sees other people as obstacles, as threats, or as mere tools to affirm his own superiority. He wants admiration, but not intimacy. He wants control, but not vulnerability. And because of this, he destroys every chance at true connection. But Zosima, he does the opposite. He embraces humility, he admits his flaws, he chooses love over pride. And because of this, he finds true meaning in life. Dostoevsky's message is clear. If we live only for ourselves, we will suffer alone. But if we follow the path of Christ, if we humble ourselves, if we serve, if we love, we will find redemption. So we are left with a choice. Do we remain underground, trapped in our illusions of superiority? Because in the end, true strength isn't in domination. It's in surrendering to something greater than yourself. And that is the path to redemption.